Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to cover the topic of RSI, repetitive strain injuries, particularly of the hands, thumb and fingers. So clinically, RSI accounts for a huge amount of patients, and one of the things I want to challenge here is this idea that RSI, this repetitive strain injury, is due to repetitive strain. It sounds very silly because if you have RSI and you found your way to this video, I don't want to discount anything that you have been told or go against how you feel or try and throw a spanner into the works in that sense. But I just want to talk about this in a broader context because clinically I see a lot of RSIs being very persistent and hard to get rid of, not because of the nature of the condition, but because as an industry, we're potentially missing the bigger picture and the cause of those tissues to become dysfunctional. So if you're happy to watch this video all the way through, hopefully by the end of it, you will hopefully feel validated in terms of how you feel about your RSI, but you'll hopefully be empowered with a few things to think about to get to work on to hopefully regain some control over that RSI and hopefully conquer those symptoms very quickly, hopefully. So I guess the initial thing that we want to touch on with RSI, this idea of repetitive strain. Now, on the surface, the idea makes perfect sense that people, their thumb becomes sore, their fingers become sore because they're using them a lot. Whether you're an artist or a musician or you're at a computer all day or you're out in the workforce using your hands and wrists and fingers a lot, it does make sense intellectually that if you use it too much, that something can start to get injured and sore over time. But the interesting thing about this idea of using something too much is that it goes against the basic function and adaptation of the body. So the body's designed to be used first and foremost, but it's designed to be punished and thrive based on punishment. And what I mean by that is if you go to the gym and you did bicep curl after bicep curl after bicep curl, we would expect your bicep to get bigger and stronger to cope with that load. We expect your endurance to get better. If you're someone who plays piano, the more you use your hands and fingers, the more skilled and more competent you become because your brain adapts to the thing that you ask it to do, makes it easier for you to do, and wires those pathways to make them more efficient and more productive. So again, we have on one side of things, if you're trying to learn a new skill, you're trying to get better at something, we say practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the better you're supposed to get. But yet on the same level, I guess, but the different side of the coin is that we say if you use it too much, then it's understandable that something starts to go wrong. But when you put those two things together, those two ideas almost butt heads a little bit where it's hard for both of those to exist in the same world. Yes, if you practice a lot, maybe there's a threshold that's too much and those tissues won't enjoy that. But again, that flies in the face of this idea of adaptation. Your body consistently keeps meeting that demand. Now, there can certainly be a huge jump. So we've all been through this experience where, say you haven't done a particular exercise or activity for a while, and then say you haven't been rock climbing for years, and you suddenly go rock climbing and you throw yourself into it, you really enjoy it, you maybe do it for 3 hours with your best friend, and by the end of it, your arms and wrists, they're so tired, you wake up the next day and you just can't move them because you've got that DOMS or that delayed onset of muscle soreness where you've, I guess, used it far more than those tissues are happy to have tolerated for a long time. It's a bit of a, not a scare to them, but it's something unexpected, and then your body sort of scrambles to deal with that. But what we often see with a lot of people is we don't necessarily see that huge jump consistently to set those tissues up for RSI. So the point I want to make here is that yes, movement and use can cause a problem, but it shouldn't cause a problem with tissue that's already healthy in the first place. And what I mean by that is that what I find clinically is that if someone has a thumb issue or a finger issue or a wrist issue, whatever it is, generally there's something going on before that sets that up to fail, so that when you put it into a repetitive scenario, you've lowered the tissue's natural tolerance to cope. You've lowered that buffer so that you can breach its threshold for dysfunction more easily. And I think it's a really crucial thing to understand here is that if you have any RSI type symptoms, I want you to think, or at least have an open mind or be open-minded enough to, I guess, to hear that the movement itself shouldn't be a problem unless you've taken something dysfunctional into that movement over time. So what I mean by that, I guess, is that if you can undo that original dysfunction, then you should be able to allow those tissues to settle down faster, but cure your RSI in that sense. The word cure is obviously a dirty word, and rightfully so in the industry, but the idea of fixing something can't occur if you haven't changed the underlying root, potentially hidden cause of that issue. So, and it's a really important topic of conversation, because one of the main things that we get you to do if you have RSI is we get you to rest it. And it can be quite beneficial for some people who are on that sort of initial irritated scale. You give it a little bit of a rest, it has a chance to recover, and then you're right to go. But for those who've got a chronic RSI, or an RSI that's very tender or has been hanging around for a relatively longer amount of time, it becomes very impractical for you to keep resting one of the things you're supposed to be using every day for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months, depending on how long your symptoms are persisting for. So it's really important that we can have this conversation and hopefully open people's eyes up a little bit more and say, look, there's a specific dysfunctional section that can set that up to fail. And if you're addressing that original section, then potentially you can get this to settle down faster and not have it have as big of an impact in your life day to day. Because remember, your fingers and hands and wrists are there to be used. They're there to be used from the day that you're born to the day that you die. And there's no manual to say that there's a cap on how much you should use it. And again, we know that elite pianists, musicians, artists, are consistently using their hands and fingers, and they just consistently get better at it. And you should too. So there has to be this disconnect, and that's what we want to talk about right now. So without sort of talking about the preamble much longer, the one thing that sets RSI up to be there in the first place, and as a warning, this may not sound believable, but it's the neck and upper back. Dysfunction in your neck and upper back sets your hands and fingers up for failure when put into a repetitive type scenario. And that can often sound very fanciful for a lot of people, because your neck and upper back is here and your hand and fingers are all the way down here. But the really interesting thing, and I shouldn't have to say this, but it's literally connected. Now, there may not be an obvious connection here apart from the arm, but there are a whole bunch of neural connections that come from the base of your neck and the top of your upper back that control the function and the capacity of your hands and fingers. Now, what we find clinically is if you accrue some stiffness and some tightness, it doesn't have to be painful. You don't have to be walking around feeling like you've got a bad neck or a stiff neck even. But when we get into the joints and mobilize those joints and have a feel for how well they move in a way that they should be moving, invariably anyone who has some hand and thumb RSI tends to have some restriction, some stiffness in this area. And more importantly, when you test them to see how good or bad their symptoms are, if there's a particular movement that makes them feel better, makes them feel sore, as soon as you free up some of that dysfunction and you retest those same activities, you can see a sudden improvement in that function. Now, it may take a little bit of time to free this stuff up enough to restore normal function here, but if you're hitting on anything important, you should see an immediate sort of alteration or improvement in your symptoms to give you that awareness and to give you that confidence that you're not wasting your time, that you're pushing on something and freeing something up that is directly associated with something you may not have thought of before. So again, the way to do this and a way to figure this out, and we've made a video on this before, but it's a really powerful thing, is just using a ball. So the ball is fantastic, and this is a lacrosse ball, but a tennis ball, baseball, cricket ball, lacrosse ball, any ball that you feel comfortable has the density that suits your neck and how comfortable it feels. This can be a diagnostic tool and a treatment at the same time. So what I always urge anyone to do, particularly if you don't necessarily believe me to start with, and again, you don't have to take my word for any of this, if I'm speaking the truth, you'll see results. And that's the important thing to take away from this. We want to set a high standard, particularly when it can easily be skepticism with the distance between these two areas. So what I urge you to do, if you have been given the label of RSI, whether it's de Quervain's, whether it's just an index finger problem or a wrist tendonitis or whatever it is in that hand, do a movement or an activity that gives you the symptoms that you don't like. So if it's maybe your thumb tendon, if you hook your thumb under and then just gently twist it away, that might give you the sensation that you don't like, but we want to start somewhere. We want to give you a reference point to say, this is where you started. We're going to do this exercise and we're going to do the exact same thing again. And if you feel like you've loosened up your neck, you deserve to see some type of change, whether it's an increase in your strength, a subtle decrease in your pain. Maybe you could do more before your pain came on. You want something that tells you that you're on the right track. So again, as always, what we want to do here is we want to start at the base of the neck, so around the back. So you can do this up against the wall. You can do it lying on the floor. I'll do it up against the wall here for the purpose of this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ball in the middle of my neck at the back, so where the bumps are down the middle. I'm going to let the ball roll off to one side. So not all the way out to the side around here, but all I'm going to do is start in the middle, and I'm going to have to roll my head and neck towards the side that I want to go to until I feel like the ball is on that bony shelf. Now, the important thing here is that you don't want to roll around like the tendency will be for a lot of people. We want to find a position that hits on something stiff and tight, and then we want to stay here. Now, while I let this ball press in, we want to keep this going for a minute or two, or until you feel like that tissue starts to give or those joints start to move better. What's really important about this is if you have an RSI symptoms on one side, that doesn't guarantee that it's the same side of your neck and upper back which houses all the stiffness and tightness. It can legitimately be the other side, which can be often even more unbelievable for a lot of people. But your body doesn't care about left and rights. It just cares about holistic function. So again, imagine that we take away this arbitrary division of left and rights, and we just think about this as a shirt, for example. If I tighten up and bind up my shirt on one side, not only does it cause some dysfunction here, but it pulls some slack from above, it pulls some slack from the other side underneath, as well as that local dysfunction on that side. So what I'm trying to get at here is when you've found a spot that feels important, compare it to the exact same spot on the other side and spend the most time on the side that feels the stiffest. So forget about left and rights, just base it on what you feel. If one side feels stiffer, but your symptoms are on the other side, then great. Spend just as much time on this side, freeing it up and making it feel looser. Once you feel like you've had enough on one spot, then just move the ball down a fraction, move it to the next joint or up to the next joint. Just go hunting down and up. So down to sort of mid shoulder blade level, up to sort of mid neck and above, for any sections of your spine that feel stiff and tight. Now, if you're very lucky, you might find that as you put some pressure on one of the joints, you may actually feel something happen in the area that connects to your symptoms. If you do, perfect. Nothing screams connected like pushing here and then feeling something down at your hands. It's a really good way to feel confident that you're on the right area. So again, once you've done that, then recheck your test again to gauge improvement. Because as I said, we're not here to waste your time. We just want to help with things that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. So I think it's a really important feature of RSI. And yes, you have to do all the local stuff, massaging, strengthening work. If you're using a splint, then obviously you want to use that based on how useful you feel it is. If it's something that you feel really helps you get through the day, then it's completely fine. Don't just wear the splint because someone's told you to. Wear it because you feel like it genuinely helps. Particularly if you start to claw back some of that function through your neck, feeding some slack into the thumb from the neck, the nerves and the function of the nerves, upregulate that hand and thumb and finger function, and then decide what you feel you need to do with that brace as well. But that local treatment still helps. And again, remember, if you have any dysfunction in your hands, it's very likely that there's going to be some dysfunction in your forearms, because that's where a lot of the muscles and tendons reside to control your fingers and hand. So make sure you're addressing that as well. But I guess the purpose of this video is not necessarily for the symptomatic stuff, because that's what a lot of people do really well. There's a lot of good advice around that. I just wanted to make something that sort of hopefully explains why it happens in the first place. Why you, why not someone else, why it's one hand and not the other, why it's one finger more than the other. There's a very perfectly reasonable explanation for those things, and often it resides in the neck and upper back. So I think if you are happy to take that on board, as I say, give it a go. Let me know in the comments below. If you're happy just to type in what it is that you're dealing with, like what type of RSI that you have, and also whether this information is news to you, whether it's something you've heard before, but also what you find is helpful for your RSI, because The purpose of these videos is I'd love them to reach as many people as possible. And if you are having a specific issue, there's every chance that there's hundreds of people out there that are having the same problems. They're just looking for information that works. So hopefully we can collate that on a video like this. If you found it useful, please let me know by leaving a like below. And if you feel like this content is interesting for you and you like the way that we're sort of thinking about the causes of problems and the information we're presenting, please genuinely consider subscribing as well. It just helps this channel grow. It helps these videos get out to more people, which is the ultimate goal. There's a lot of information that I think isn't well known, that works really, really well clinically. We're solving a lot of problems clinically that just aren't getting solved naturally because we're taking a step back and understanding the process of what's caused it. So if you could do that, that would be great. So just to finish up, yes, use can be one of the catalysts for RSI, but only if there's some ongoing dysfunction, some hidden dysfunctions, an unknown dysfunction there in the first place that lowers that tissue's capacity to tolerate normal use. Because again, using your hands, fingers, and wrists is normal. It's exactly what they're there for. It's there to be used, and it's there to adapt to things that it's not used to. So those two things on their own, we shouldn't be using those as an excuse for RSI, but we can sort of put it in context of some dysfunction setting that up to fail. So hopefully that's good information for you guys. So we'll leave it there, but as always, please consider subscribing, leave a like below and a comment to let me know how you're going, and then we'll see you in the next one.